I texted my ex-boyfriend comparisons of my current partner's body for 3 weeks straight, and everyone who's found out thinks I'm some kind of emotional terrorist. That assessment isn't entirely wrong, but it's also not the whole story. I've destroyed the one good thing in my life, and I did it while convinced I was being supportive. Jake might never recover from what he discovered last Tuesday. My friends have already marked me as radioactive, and I've become the kind of woman who weaponizes vulnerability while pretending to protect it. People think I was cheating or planning to leave him for Ryan, which makes me want to scream because it's so much more pathetic than that. I wasn't trying to trade up, I was trying to validate my own lies. I'm going to explain everything now. The first message I sent at 2 a.m. after Jake fell asleep measuring himself in our bathroom. The folder of screenshots I kept like trophies. And the final text that turned my phone into a bomb waiting to explode. The truth is uglier than anyone's assumptions. My whole life I'd been the girl who rolled her eyes when other women talked about size. I prided myself on being different, evolved, attracted to souls not physical dimensions. When I met Jake at the pottery studio, his gentle hands molding clay into delicate shapes, I thought I'd finally found someone who made all my adolescent insecurities about being shallow disappear. He was kind in a way that felt permanent. He remembered that I liked my coffee with exactly 2 pumps of vanilla. He asked questions about my childhood trauma and actually listened to the answers. The first time we slept together, he kept apologizing. Not for his performance, which was attentive and generous, but for what he lacked. I know I'm not, he mumbled into my shoulder afterwards. You probably noticed. I told him size doesn't matter so fiercely that I almost believed myself. I held his face and said all the right things, the things I'd want to hear if I were him. The problem was how often he needed to hear them. Every time we got close, the question would resurface in some new form, asking if he was the smallest I'd been with, if I was faking satisfaction, if I missed being with someone more substantial. Ryan's text came on a Thursday that had already been terrible. Jake had spent the morning asking if we could try some enhancement device he'd read about online. My ex's name popped up on my screen while I was deleting Jake's search history from our shared iPad. Hey, still have your copy of the Bell Jar. Want me to mail it? Harmless. The kind of message you send someone you haven't spoken to in 8 months. I should have said yes and ended it. Instead I typed, keep it, I'm seeing someone who probably needs it more than I do. The subtext was there immediately, radioactive between the lines. Ryan replied, that bad huh? That tiny rush of being understood by someone from my past was the first hit of something dangerous. I deleted the thread before Jake got home, telling myself it was better if he didn't know I'd talked to Ryan at all. That night when Jake asked for the 10th time if I was sure his body was enough for me, I smiled and said, you're perfect, while my phone burned in my pocket with the weight of my lie. I started saving Ryan's contact under the name Lindsay Work after Jake mentioned seeing his name flash across my screen. The rationalizations came so easily they felt like truth. I was processing Jake's anxiety in a safe space. Ryan was the only person who knew what it was like to date someone with this specific insecurity. He'd been with me when I was neurotic about my nose, after all. He would understand how exhausting it becomes to reassure someone who refuses to be reassured. When Jake asked why I kept stepping outside to take calls, I told him my sister was having marriage problems. The lie sat between us like a third person in our bed. My best friend Sarah noticed me typing furiously at brunch and asked who had me so engaged. I said it was work, but I could see her expression shift, the way her eyes narrowed just slightly, the way she stopped asking follow-up questions. That was the first time someone looked at me and saw something they didn't trust. The real damage began when Ryan asked specifically what Jake was insecure about. We were 3 weeks into our renewed correspondence, and I'd been vague until then. But I was drunk on cheap wine and self-righteousness, convinced I was the victim of Jake's constant need for validation. I typed the details. I told him about the measuring, the apologies, the way Jake's voice got small when he asked if I missed being with other men. Ryan responded with laughing emojis and the kind of male validation I pretended to hate. Damn, sounds rough. You never had that problem with me, remember? I should have blocked him then. Instead, I screenshotted the message and saved it to a folder labeled Tax Docs 2021. That folder became my secret museum of reassurance. Proof that someone else thought I was justified. Proof that I had been with someone who never made me carry this particular burden. The dramatic irony was excruciating. I was collecting evidence that I wasn't shallow while building a case study in superficiality. Jake found the first breadcrumb while I was in the shower. He'd never been the type to snoop, but my phone kept buzzing with Lindsay Work messages, and his anxiety had metastasized into suspicion. I came out of the bathroom to find him holding my phone, the screen dark but his face unmistakably shattered. Why does your coworker keep texting about our sex life? He asked, his voice so quiet I barely heard him. I snatched the phone and said I'd explain. then launched into a lie about how I'd confided in a work friend about his anxiety, that I'd used Ryan's name as a pseudonym to protect his privacy. The story was so convoluted it barely held together, but Jake wanted to believe me so badly that he pretended it made sense. Sarah confronted me the next day at coffee. She'd seen Ryan's actual name on my phone when I left it face up on the table, and she'd put together the timeline. "You've been talking to your ex about Jake's dick, haven't you?" she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. I laughed too loudly and called her paranoid, but my hands shook so badly I spilled my latte. That was the moment I knew my behavior had a smell and people were starting to catch it. What I hadn't told anyone yet was that I'd sent Ryan a photograph, not of me worse. I'd photographed Jake's search history, the specific medical forums where he'd posted questions using a pseudonym, describing himself in clinical terms that made my chest ache. I sent it to Ryan with the caption, "This is what I'm working with. Tell me I'm not crazy for being exhausted." Ryan's response had been immediate and disgusting. "Shit, no wonder he's insecure, poor guy." I saved that screenshot too, the ultimate proof that I wasn't the problem, Jake's anxiety was. The spiral tightened when Ryan started initiating contact more frequently, always with references to our past intimacy. He'd mention a song we played during sex, a position I liked, things that existed in a relationship I'd carefully packed away. I didn't shut it down. I responded with laughing emojis with "those were the days," with enough engagement to keep him talking. My justifications became performance art. I was gathering data on male psychology. I was helping Jake by understanding the source of his insecurity. I was the most supportive girlfriend in the world, sacrificing my own moral cleanliness to salve his wounds. At Jake's office party, I got too drunk and left my phone open to a message from Ryan that said, "You always knew how to make a guy feel like a king." Jake's colleague saw it over my shoulder and gave me a look I still see when I close my eyes. I closed the app, but the damage was spreading like ink in water. That night, Jake asked to see my phone, not asked, begged. "Please," he said, "just show me I'm being crazy." I told him trust means not having to show him anything, which was the most manipulative truth I'd ever weaponized. I watched him shrink into himself, becoming smaller than any physical dimension could measure. I made my worst decision at 3 in the morning after we'd fought about my phone secrecy for 3 hours straight. Jake had finally fallen asleep, exhausted and tear-streaked, his back turned to me. I took a photo of him sleeping, the way his shoulders rose and fell, the vulnerability of his exposed neck, and I sent it to Ryan with the caption, "This is what broken looks like." I have no justification for this. I have no explanation beyond the fact that I wanted someone to witness the devastation I was causing, to validate that yes, it was that bad, yes, I was that powerful, yes, this was about me and not Jake at all. Ryan responded, "You did that?" And I felt sick with pride. The ultimate secret, the one that lived beneath all the others like bedrock, was that I'd created a spreadsheet. I know how that sounds. I tracked Jake's measurements, his mood, our sexual frequency, and cross-referenced them with Ryan's remembered dimensions and the dates of our correspondence. I told myself it was to prove to Jake that his anxiety was unfounded, that I could show him data that his mood didn't correlate with anything physical. But the spreadsheet had a hidden column where I rated my own satisfaction, and another where I tracked how often I thought about Ryan when Jake touched me. I'd sent this spreadsheet to Ryan 2 days ago, asking if he thought the data was statistically significant. He'd replied, "You're fucked up, you know that?" I saved that message too. The breaking point arrived disguised as an ordinary Tuesday. Jake had been sleeping on the couch for a week, his trust in me eroding like shoreline. I'd been drinking tequila in my car before work, hiding bottles in my trunk like a teenager. Sarah had stopped returning my calls after I accused her of trying to sabotage my relationship out of jealousy. My mother had left me a voicemail asking if I was okay, using the tone she'd reserved for my worst depressions. I was a woman coming apart at the molecular level, pretending to be whole. I self-sabotaged with surgical precision. I left my phone on the kitchen counter unlocked while I took a deliberately long shower. I knew Jake would see it. Part of me wanted the bomb to finally detonate so I could stop holding it. When I came downstairs, he was sitting at the table, my phone in front of him, his face completely blank. "I didn't look," he said, his voice hollow. "I wanted to, God, I wanted to, but I realized if I looked, whatever I found would be real, and I can't handle real right now. I should have confessed then. I should have thrown myself at his feet." Instead, I said, "I have nothing to hide," and watched him die a little more. My support system had been crumbling for weeks, but it shattered that afternoon when Sarah showed up at our apartment. She marched past me into Jake's home office and closed the door. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard her say, "You need to leave her. I don't know what she's doing, but I know it's killing you." Jake's response was barely audible, "I love her." Sarah's voice was pure steel, "She's not the person you think she is." When she left, she looked at me with such pity I wanted to rip my own skin off. "You're going to lose everything," she said. And you won't even know why. The person who got hurt by my continued deception was actually me, though I wouldn't realize it until later. I kept pushing Jake away, rejecting his attempts at intimacy because the guilt made me physically ill. He interpreted this as confirmation of his worst fears, that I was no longer attracted to him, that I'd found him lacking in some fundamental way. He started working out obsessively, buying supplements, researching surgeries he'd never afford. I was so wrapped in my own shame that I didn't see him destroying himself trying to become enough for the woman who was secretly measuring him against another man. The cruelty was so layered it became abstract. The direct question came at dinner one night when I'd been silent for 40 minutes, unable to speak through the weight of my secrets. Jake set down his fork and looked at me with eyes that had finally given up. Did you sleep with him? Is that what this is? The simplicity of the question broke something in me. I could answer no honestly, but the truth was so much worse than infidelity. I said no, of course not, and watched him deflate. He wanted the answer to be yes. Yes would have been clean. Yes would have been something he could understand. Setting up the biggest revelation, I became paranoid about the cloud. I'd taken photos of Jake that existed somewhere beyond my phone in the digital ether. I lay awake at night considering the permanent nature of what I'd done, the way you can never truly delete anything. I thought about the comparison photo I'd sent, the one where Jake had measured himself and sent it to me in a moment of desperate vulnerability, asking me to tell him it was average. I told him it was perfect, then immediately forwarded it to Ryan with the message, "See, this is what I'm dealing with, tell me it's not that small." Ryan had replied, "It's not that small, but I see why he's worried." I'd screenshotted that exchange 17 times. The full confession came spilling out when Jake finally did look at my phone. I'd fallen asleep drunk on the couch and he'd spent the night building the courage. He started with the texts, then found the folder, then the spreadsheet, then the photos. I woke to him standing over me holding my phone like it was evidence in a trial. "Explain this," he said, and his voice wasn't angry anymore. It was empty. I tried to grab the phone, but he held it above his head. "No, explain it with your words, tell me what you did." The most damning detail wasn't the comparison photo, though that was bad enough. It was the caption I'd put on the sleeping photo of Jake, the one I'd sent to Ryan. When Jake scrolled to that message, his hands started shaking so violently he dropped the phone. I caught it and saw what he was seeing, the image of him vulnerable and asleep, and beneath it my words, "This is what broken looks like." Ryan's response was visible below, "You did that?" In my reply, the green bubble that proved my guilt, "I know. I'm that powerful." Jake looked at me like I was a stranger who'd broken into his home and photographed him for sport. The first major consequence hit before I could explain. Jake packed a duffel bag while I stood in the doorway, offering sentences that started with, "But you don't understand," and ended with him holding up his hand. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He moved through our apartment gathering his things with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning his escape for weeks. When he reached the door, he turned and said, "You told me size doesn't matter, but you made it the only thing that mattered. You made me feel small in ways I didn't even know existed." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the taste of what I'd built. The final shoe dropped 2 days later when Ryan's girlfriend sent me a message request on Instagram. She included a screenshot of a group chat where Ryan had shared my messages, including the photo of Jake with 4 of his friends. The caption said, "My ex is psycho, but at least I never had to deal with this level of crazy." His friends had responded with laughing emojis with "damn dude," with one asking if he could show his girlfriend so she'll stop complaining. The betrayal was so complete that I couldn't even feel it. I was a story they were telling, a cautionary tale about insecure men and the women who exploit them. My shame had become someone else's entertainment. The aftermath spread through my life like a toxin. Jake told everyone in our shared circles what I'd done, showing them the texts I'd sent him about his body, the ones where I'd forwarded his private photos. He didn't include the context that I'd been trying to help, though even I couldn't say that with a straight face anymore. He simply showed them the evidence of my cruelty and they believed what they saw. My friend group evaporated. Sarah was the first to block me, but the others followed without explanation. Their silence was more damning than any lecture. My reputation at work collapsed when Ryan's friend who worked in HR heard the story. Suddenly my performance reviews mentioned my lack of discretion and poor judgment. I was passed over for a promotion I'd been promised, then given a performance improvement plan for things that had never been issues before. When I confronted my boss, she said, "Character matters here. We need to trust our team leads." I wasn't fired, but I was made to feel so unwelcome that I quit before they could push me out. I told myself it was unfair, that my private life shouldn't affect my professional life, but I'd been the one who turned someone's private body into public discussion. Social media became a minefield. Jake's sister posted a thread about violating consent in relationships that got 6,000 retweets. She never named me, but she included details that were specific enough for anyone who knew us to identify me. The comments were vicious. People called me everything from a predator to the reason men have trust issues. I deactivated my accounts, but screenshots lived forever. My mother called after seeing them, her voice small and confused. Maya, what did you do? I couldn't answer without hearing how monstrous it sounded. The unexpected consequence I hadn't anticipated was the complete erosion of my own identity. I'd spent my entire adult life defining myself as the woman who didn't care about superficial things, who loved deeply and without condition. That narrative had been my armor, my proof that I was different from the girls who'd hurt me in high school with their rankings and their cruelty. When that identity dissolved, there was nothing underneath. I was just a person who had done a terrible thing, and I didn't know what came after that. A moment of genuine self-awareness broke through during my third therapy session. My therapist asked me what I'd been feeling when I sent the photo of Jake. I started with my usual justifications, the ones about wanting to help, wanting reassurance. She interrupted. Maya, what were you really feeling? I stared at the wall for a full minute, and then it came out in a whisper. I felt powerful. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had the upper hand in a relationship, like I could be the one who was wanted more, the one who had options. The truth of it made me vomit into her trash can. I'd punished Jake for his insecurity by proving I was the most insecure person in the room. My current state is 3 months of isolation. I moved back in with my mother temporarily, though our conversations are stilted and careful. I deleted Ryan's number after sending him a final message telling him he was complicit in abuse. He never replied. I go to therapy twice a week and have been diagnosed with something called relationship obsessive-compulsive disorder, paired with a personality disorder that explains my need for validation but doesn't excuse it. I haven't downloaded a dating app. I haven't touched my pottery wheel. I exist in the space between who I was and who I'm too scared to become. I'm telling this story now because last night I saw a photo of Jake and his new girlfriend. She's a ceramicist too, someone from his studio. In the caption she'd written, "Finally feel safe enough to be vulnerable with someone." The comments were full of people celebrating his healing, his new beginning. I realized I was the villain in his redemption story, the one who'd hurt him so badly that anyone who treated him with basic decency looked like a savior by comparison. I told him size doesn't matter, and I meant it when I said it, but my actions proved I was obsessed with it in ways I couldn't even admit to myself. I measured him, compared him, documented him, shared him, all while claiming none of it mattered. That level of cognitive dissonance should be medically impossible. What I've learned is that you can't reassure someone of something you don't genuinely believe. Every time I told Jake he was enough, some part of me was tallying up the proof that maybe he wasn't, that I was settling, that I deserved someone who didn't need reassurance. The cruel irony is that Jake's size was never the problem. His insecurity was manageable, human, understandable. My insecurity was the monster that destroyed us. I was so terrified of being seen as shallow that I performed the deepest, most grotesque version of shallowness possible. I turned his private pain into a public performance piece starring me as the long-suffering girlfriend. So here's where I leave you. Judge me. Tell me I'm irredeemable. Block my number and warn your friends about women like me. But before you do, ask yourself if you've ever been so scared of being the villain in your own story that you became exactly what you feared just to prove you had the power to choose your role. Ask yourself if you've ever taken someone's trust and digitized it, shared it, measured it against an impossible standard while claiming the standard didn't exist. Ask yourself if you could look Jake in the eye and explain that you destroyed him because you were afraid of what your preferences said about your character. I can't. I've tried writing that apology 1,000 times, and it always comes out sounding like another plea for my own absolution. The truth is, size doesn't matter. But what I did matters more than I can